Welcome to the 1000 Nights and 1 Night. Now, when it was the 963rd night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that quoth the damsel to her sister, I have covenanted with him that I will not be united to him unlawfully. But as he hath risked himself and included these perils, I will be earth for his treading, and dust to his sandals. Replied her sister, In this intent may Allah deliver him. And my mistress rejoined, Soon shalt thou see how I will do, so I may lawfully foregather with him, and there is no help but that I lavish my heart's blood to devise this. Now as we were in talk, behold, we heard a great noise, and turning saw the Caliph making for her chamber. So engrossed was he by the thought of her, whereupon she took me, O Prince of True Believers, and hid me in a souterrain, and shut down the trap door upon me. Then she went out to meet the Caliph, who entered and sat down, while she stood between his hands to serve him, and commanded to bring wine. Now the Caliph loved a damsel by name Banja, who was the mother of Al-Mutaza Billah, but they had fallen out and parted. And in the pride of her beauty and loveliness, she would not make peace with him, nor would Al-Mutakawakil for the dignity of the Caliphate and the kingship make peace with her, neither humble himself to her, albeit his heart was aflame with passion for her, but sought to solace his mind from her and her mates among the slave girls, and with going into them in their chambers. Now he loved Sharjat al-Dur singing, so he bade her sing. When she took the lute and tuning the strings, sang these verses. The world tricks I admire betwixt me and her. How us parted the world would be me incline. I shunned thee till said they, He loves not love. I sought thee till they said, No patience is mine. Then, O love of her, added to my longing each night, and O solace thy comforts for doom days assign. Soft as silk is her touch, and her low, sweet voice, twixt o'er much and o'er little I draweth the line. In eyne whereof Allah said, Be ye, and they became a man's wit, like the working of wine. When the Caliph heard these verses, he was pleased with exceeding pleasure, and I also, O Commander of the Faithful, was pleased in my hiding place. And but for the bounty of Almighty Allah, I had cried out, and we had been disgraced. Then she sang also these couplets. I embrace him, yet after him yearns my soul, for his love can aught than embrace be nigher. I kiss his lips to assuage my low, but each kiss gars its glow with more flaming fire. 'Tis as though my vitals I thirst unquenched, till I see two souls mixed in one entire. The Caliph was delighted and said, O Sharjat al-Dur, ask a boon of me. She replied, O Commander of the Faithful, I ask of thee my freedom for the sake of the reward thou wilt obtain therein. Quoth he, Thou art free for the love of Allah. Whereupon she kissed ground before him. He resumed, Take the lute and sing me somewhat on the subject of my slave girl, of whom I am enamored with warmest love. The folk seek my pleasure, and I seek hers. So she took the lute and sang these two couplets. My charmer, who spellest my piety, on all accounts I'll have thee, or by humble suit which besitteth love, or by force more fitting my sovereignty. The Caliph admired these verses and said, Now take up thy lute and sing me a song, setting out my case with 3 damsels who hold the reins of my heart, and make rest depart. And they are thyself, and that wilful one, and another I will not name, who hath not her like. So she took the lute, and playing a lively measure, sang these couplets. 3 lovely girls hold my bridle rein, and in highest stead my heart o'erreign. I have none to obey amid all mankind, but obeying them I but win disdain. This is done through the kingship of love, whereby the best of my kingship they made their gain. The Caliph marvelled with exceeding marvel at the aptness of these verses to his case, and his delight inclined him to reconciliation with the recalcitrant damsel. So he went forth and made for her chamber, whither a slave girl preceded him, and announced to her the coming of the Caliph. She advanced to meet him and kissed the ground before him. Then she kissed his feet, and he was reconciled to her, and she was reconciled to him. Such was the case with the Caliph. But as regards Sharjat al-Dur, she began to rejoicing, and said, I am become a free woman by the blessed coming. Surely Allah will help me in that which I shall contrive, so I may foregather with thee in a lawful way. And I said, Alhamdulillah. Now as we were talking, behold, her Mameluke eunuch entered, and we related to him that which had passed, when he said, Praise be Allah, who hath made the affair to end well. And we implore the Almighty to crown his favors with thy safe faring forth of the palace. Presently appeared my mistress' sister, whose name was Fatir, and Sharjat al-Dawr said to her, O my sister, how shall we do to bring him out of the palace in safety? For indeed Allah hath vouchsafed me manumission, and by the blessing of his coming I am become a free woman. Quoth Fatir, I see nothing for it but to dress him in women's gear. So she brought me a suit of women's clothes and clad me therein, and I went out forthright, O Commander of the Faithful. But when I came to the midst of the palace, behold, I found the Caliph seated there, with the eunuchs in attendance upon him. When he saw me, he misdoubted of me with exceeding doubt, and said to his suite, Hasten and bring me yonder handmaiden who is faring forth. So they brought me back to him, and raised the veil from my face, which when he saw, he knew me, and questioned me of my case. I told him the whole truth, hiding naught, and when he heard my story, he pondered my case a while, without stay or delay, and going into Sharjat al-Dawr's chamber, said to her, How couldst thou prefer before me one of the sons of the merchants? She kissed ground between his hands, and told him her tale from first to last, in accordance with the truth. And he, hearing it, had compassion upon her, and his heart relented to her, and he excused her by reason of love and its circumstances. Then he went away, and her eunuch came in to her and said, Be of good cheer, for when thy lover was set before the Caliph, he questioned him, and he told him that which thou toldest him, word by word. Presently the Caliph returned, and calling me before him, said to him, What made thee dare to violate the palace of the Caliphate? I replied, O Commander of the Faithful, 'twas my ignorance and passion, and my confidence in thy clemency and generosity that drave me to this. And I wept, and I kissed the ground before him. Then said he, I pardon you both, and maybe be seated. So I sat down, and he sent for the Qazi, Ahmad ibn Abu Dawad, and married me to her. Then he commanded to make over all that was hers to me, and they displayed her to me in her lodging. After 3 days I went forth and transported all her goods and gear to my own house. So everything that thou hast seen, O Commander of the Faithful, in my house, and whereof thou misdoubtest, is of her marriage equipage. After this she said to me one day, Know that Allah al-Mutawakkil is a generous man, and I fear lest he remember us with ill mind, or that some one of the envious remind him of us. Wherefore I propose to do somewhat that thou may ensure us against this. Quoth I, And what is that? And quoth she, I mean to ask his leave to go to the pilgrimage, and repent of singing. I replied, Right as this thou readest. But as we were talking, behold, in came a messenger from the Caliph to seek her, for that al-Mutawakkil loved her singing. So she went with the officer, and did her service to the Caliph, who said to her, Sever not thyself from us. And she answered, I hear, and I obey. Now it chanced one day after this she went to him, he having sent for her, as was his wont. But before I knew, she came back with her raiment rent, and her eyes full of tears. At this I was alarmed, misdoubting me that he had commanded to seize upon us, and said, Verily we are Allah's, and unto him shall we return. Is al-Mutawakkil wroth with us? She replied, Where is al-Mutawakkil? Indeed, al-Mutawakkil's rule is ended, and his trace is blotted out. Cried I, Tell me what has happened. And she said, He was seated behind the curtain, drinking with Al-Fath bin Kakan and Satkin bin Satkah, when his son Al-Muntasir fell upon him with the company of the Turks, and they slew him. And merriment was turned to misery, and joy to weeping, and wailing to annoy. So I fled, I and the slave girl, and Allah save us. When I heard this, O Commander of the Faithful, I arose forthright and went downstream to Basra, where the news reached me of the falling out of war between Al-Muntasir and Al-Muntasir bin Billah. Wherefore I was affrighted, and transported my wife and all my wealth to Basra. This, then, is the end of my tale, O Prince of True Believers, nor have I added to or taken from it a single syllable. So all that thou seest in my house bearing the name of thy grandfather, Al-Mutakawakil, is of his bounty to us, and the fount of our fortune is from thy noble sources. For indeed ye are people of munificence, and a mine of beneficence. The Caliph marveled at his story, and rejoiced therein with joy exceeding, and Abu Al-Hassan brought forth to him the lady, and the children she had borne him, and they kissed the ground before the Caliph, who wondered at their beauty. Then he called for the ink case and paper, and wrote Abu Al-Hassan a patent of exemption from taxes on his lands and houses for 20 years. Moreover, he rejoiced in him, and made him his cup companion till the world parted them, and they took up their abode in the tombs after having dwelt under the palace domes. And glory be to Allah, the King merciful of doom. And they also tell the tale concerning Kamar Al-Zaman and the jeweler's wife. There was once in time of old a merchant hight Abd Al-Rahman, whom Allah had blessed with a son and a daughter. And for their much love and loveliness, he named the girl Kabab al-Sabah, and the boy Kamar al-Zaman. When he saw what Allah had vouchsafed the twain of beauty and loveliness, brilliancy and symmetry, he feared for them the evil eyes of the aspirers, and the jibbing tongues of the jealous, and the craft of the crafty, and the wiles of the wicked, and shut them up from the folk in a mansion for the space of 14 years, during which time none saw them save their parents and a slave girl who served them. Now their father could recite the Quran even as Allah sent it down, as did his wife. Wherefore the mother taught her daughter to read and recite it, and the father his son, till both had gotten it by heart. Moreover, the twain learned from their parents writing and reckoning, and all manner of knowledge and polite letters, and needed no master. When Kamar al-Zaman came to years of manhood, the wife said to her husband, How long wilt thou keep thy son Kamar al-Zaman sequestered from the eyes of the folk? Is he a girl or a boy? He answered, A boy. Rejoined she, And be he a boy, what dost thou not carry him to the bazaar, and seat him in thy shop, that he may know the folk, and they may know him, to the intent that it may become notorious among men that he is thy son, and do thou teach him to sell and to buy. Peradventure somewhat may befall thee, so shall the folk know him as thy son, and he shall lay his hand on thy leavings. But an thou die, as the case now is, he can say to the folk, I am the son of the merchant Abd al-Rahman. Verily, they will not believe him, but will cry, We have never seen him, and we know not he had a son. Wherefore the government will seize thy goods, and thy son will be despoiled. In like manner the girl, I mean to make her known among the folk. So maybe some of her own condition may ask her in marriage, and we will wed her to him and rejoice in her. Quoth he, I did thus of my fear for them from the eyes of the folk. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 964th night, she continued, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the merchant's wife spake to him in such wise, he replied, I did thus of my fear for them from the eyes of the folk, and because I love them both. And love is jealousy exceedingly, and well saith that who spoke these verses. O my sight, I am jealous for thee of me, of thyself, of thy stead, of thy destiny. Though I shrine thee in eyes by the craze of me, in such nearness irk I should never see. Though thou wert by my side all the days of me, till doomsday, I ne'er had enough of thee. Then said his wife, Put thy trust in Allah, for no harm betideth him whom he protecteth, and carry him with thee this day to the shop. Then she clad the boy in the costliest clothes, and he became a seduction to all on who cast sight on him, and an affliction to the heart of each lover wight. His father took him and carried him to the market, whilst all who saw him were ravished with him, and accosted him, kissing his hand and saluting him with salams. Quoth one, Indeed, the sun hath risen in such a place, and blazeth in the bazaar. And another, the rising place of the full moon is in such a quarter. And a third, the new moon of the festival hath appeared to the creatures of Allah. And they went on to allude to the boy in talk, and call down blessings upon him. But his father scolded the folk for following his son to gaze upon him, because he was abashed at their talk. But he could not hinder one of them from talking, so he fell to abusing the boy's mother, and cursing her because she had been the cause of his bringing him out. And as he gazed about, he still saw the folk crowding about him, and behind and before him. Then he walked on till he reached his shop, and opening it, sat down and seated his son before him, and after which again looked out and found the thoroughfare blocked with people, for all the passers-by, going and coming, stopped before the shop to stare at that beautiful face, and could not leave him. And all the men and women crowded in knots about him, applying themselves the words of him who said, Thou madest beauty to spoil man's sprite, and saidst, O my servants, fear my reproof. But lovely, thou lovest all loveliness, how then shall thy servants refrain from love? When the merchant, Abu Al-Rahman, saw the folk thus crowding about him, and standing in rows, both women and men, to fix eyes upon his son, he was sore ashamed, and confounded, and knew not what to do. But presently there came up from the end of the bazaar a man of the wandering dervishes, clad in haircloth, and the garb of the pious servants of Allah, and seeing Kamar Al-Zaman sitting there as he were a branch of ban, springing from a mound of saffron, poured forth copious tears, and recited these two couplets. A wand, uprising from a sandy knoll, like full moon shining bright as sheen, I saw, and said, What is thy name? Replied he, Lulu. What? Asked I. Lily? And he answered, La. Then the dervish fell to walking, now drawing near, and now moving away, and wiping his grey hands with his right hand, whilst the heart of the crowd was cloven asunder for the awe of him. When he looked upon the boy, his eyes were dazzled, and his wit confounded, and exemplified in him with the saying of the poet, While that fair-faced boy abode in the place, moon of breakfast fet, he lit by his face. Lo, there came a sheikh with a leisurely pace, a reverend trusting to Allah's grace, and aesthetic signals his gait displayed. He had studied love both by day and night, and had special knowledge of wrong and right. Both for lad and lass had repined his sprite, and his form like toothpick was lean and slight, and old bones with faded skin were overlaid. In such arts our sheikh was an agronomy, with a Kitamite ever in company. In the love of woman a platonist he, but in either verse to the full degree, and Zaynab to him was the same as Zaid. Distraught by the fair, he adored the fair, or spring cap welled, bewept ruins bared. Dry branch thou hast deemed him for the stress of care, which the morning breeze swayeth here and there. For only the stone is all hardness made. In the lore of love he was wondrous wise, and wide awake with all-seeing eyes. It's rough and it's smooth he had tried and tries, and huckbuck and doe in the same self-guise, and with grey beard and beardless alike he played. Then he walked up to the boy and gave him a root of sweet basil, whereupon his father put forth his hand to his pouch and brought out for him some small matter of silver, saying, Take thy portion, O dervish, and wend thy ways. He took the dirhams, but sat down on the masonry bench alongside the shop, and opposite the boy, and fell to gazing upon him, and heaving sigh upon sigh, whilst his tears flowed like spring fountain. The folk began to look at him and remark upon him, saying, All dervishes are lewd fellows. And others said, Verily, this dervish's heart is set on fire for love of this lad. Now when Abu Al-Rahman saw this case, he arose and said to the boy, Come, O my son, let us lock up the shop and hive us to home, for it booteth not to sell and buy this day. And may Almighty Allah requite thy mother that which she hath done with us, for she was the cause of all of this. Then said he, O Dervish, rise, that I may shut my shop. So the Dervish rose, and the merchant shut his shop, and taking his son, walked away. The Dervish and the folk followed them till they reached their place, when the boy went in, and his father, turning to the Dervish, said to him, What wouldest thou, O Dervish, and why do I see thee weep? He replied, O my lord, I would fain be thy guest this night, for the guest is the guest of Almighty Allah. Quoth the merchant, Welcome to the guest of God. Enter, O Dervish. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. And so do I cease my telling of this tale for today, till it be morrow.